Sechan had ridden all the way from his university hostel to his home on a bicycle. He was known for being an excellent rider, someone who had a natural command over his bike, navigating even the trickiest of roads with confident ease. The journey had been long, but it gave him a sense of peace. Upon arrival, his uncle Daniel, whom he affectionately referred to as Daddy, was the first to welcome him. With a friendly grin and his usual warmth, Daniel remarked that Seishan had arrived earlier than expected. Seishan, visibly delighted to see him, announced that he was finally home. But Daniel, with a mischievous smile and a teasing tone, placed a reassuring hand on Seishan's shoulder and told him that unfortunately, he wouldn't be playing the role of Daddy today. His voice held a light-hearted edge, but the underlying affection between them was clear. Daniel led Seishan inside, telling him that everything had already been arranged, and asked him about the trip. As they entered the living room, Sechan responded that the trip had been good calming, even. Daniel chuckled in response and suggested that perhaps it was time for Sechan to finally make the switch to a car. Sechan, however, shook his head with a grin and admitted that he still preferred motorcycle. Daniel, wearing a look of fatherly concern, mentioned that he had been thinking about selling the motorcycle. He then invited him over to the dining table, calling him warmly to join. The table had been thoughtfully arranged, filled with a variety of home-cooked dishes. A framed photograph of Seishan's parents sat at the head of the table, surrounded by flowers and small traditional offerings. Seishan's eyes widened as he took in the sight. He couldn't help but express his amazement, commenting that Daniel had really gone all out. Daniel replied that the setup resembled a Korean memorial service. He admitted that while it might not follow every formal tradition to the letter, what mattered most was the sincerity of honoring the day Seishan's parents had passed. Touched, Sechan stepped forward, bowed deeply before his parents' photo, and softly addressed them, Mom and Dad. He told them that on this day, he was greeting them as Sechantha Korean. His voice held a mix of pride and longing, as if speaking to their memory could bridge the distance between past and present. Daniel stood beside him, gazing at the photograph with emotion in his eyes. He gently spoke to the image of his brother, telling him not to worry about his son. He assured him that Sechan had grown into a fine young man. Then, looking at Seishan with pride in his eyes, Daniel commented that the two of them, him and Seishan's father, had done a spectacular job raising such a boy. Seishan's thoughts drifted back in time. A decade ago, when he was just 10 years old, tragedy had struck. His parents had died in a sudden accident, leaving him orphaned. With no immediate relatives to turn to, Seishan had been introduced to Daniel. Back then, he was just a frightened, grieving boy, lost in a world that suddenly felt unfamiliar and cold. Daniel had been a friend of Seishan's father. They had met when his father had traveled abroad to study. According to what Seishan had heard, the two had bonded instantly, brought together by a business idea Seishan's father had proposed. That very idea had helped Daniel's business soar, and their friendship had grown deeper and more meaningful over the years. Perhaps it was that strong bond, or simply Daniel's noble heart, that led him to adopt Sechan as his own. It had seemed to him like the only right thing to do, a natural step for someone like Daniela, man who lived by his sense of duty and honor. Now, years later, Sechan was doing his best to live up to that kindness. He was studying hard, determined to make Daniel proud, to someday repay him not just through words, but by becoming someone who could stand tall in the world. As these thoughts passed, a cheerful voice brought Seishan back to the present. A girl had entered the room with lively energy, and upon seeing him, she called out his name. Without hesitation, she rushed over and gave him a warm hug, asking when he had arrived. Seishan laughed and told her it had only been moments ago. With genuine delight, he greeted her by name Monica and said that it had truly been a long time. Monica agreed wholeheartedly, exclaiming that it had been far too long and that it was so good to see him again. She then asked how he had been and whether he had missed her. Sechan grinned and told her, without hesitation, that of course he had missed her. The two shared a comfortable laugh. Monica was Daniel's girlfriend, 17 years younger than him, yet full of confidence and charm. Daniel proudly mentioned that it had been Monica who had arranged the memorial service this year all on her own. Seishan looked at her with admiration and thanked her sincerely. Monica replied that she had prepared it with the kind of care a mother might give. Seishan playfully teased her, saying she couldn't possibly be like a mother to him after all. She was only 12 years older. They all laughed together, the air light with affection and familiarity. Daniel, clearly enjoying the moment, suggested they have a pool party that evening, just the three of them, and maybe even a barbecue. Monica agreed with enthusiasm, clapping her hands in excitement. Later that evening, they prepared for the party. As they gathered near the pool, Monica recounted the story of how she and Daniel had met. She told them that initially she had thought she had been rejected and assumed that was the end of it. But then, unexpectedly, Daniel had approached her again and asked for her number. Seshan listened with amusement, remarking that it was a sweet story. Monica, laughing brightly, said that if she had known Daniel was such a smooth talker, she might not have given him her number at all. Daniel shrugged with a smirk and joked that his charm was irresistible. As the evening wore on, Seiken observed how close the two had become. Though happy for them, he found himself growing tired and excused himself, saying that he hadn't been able to sleep during finals and needed to catch up on rest. Daniel gave a small pout and said he had been hoping to have a fun night now that Seiken was a grown man, but he nodded in understanding and told him to sleep well, saying they'd catch up more in the morning. After Seiken had gone to his room, Monica leaned toward Daniel and whispered that he had no idea how much Seiken had matured. Daniel agreed, noting that the boy had grown up fast. Monica joked that just like your protein bar. She then coyly asked what she should do next. Daniel raised an eyebrow and teased her back, saying that she probably had more ideas than he did and that she was definitely getting more mischievous. He reminded her to lower her voice in case Seiken heard them, but Monica waved the concern away, saying that Seiken was a grown-up now, and he definitely knew all about love and relationships. She added that Daniel himself had mentioned that Seiken had a girlfriend in college. Monica chuckled, saying the two must have had their share of fun already. Daniel clarified that Seiken had told him the relationship had ended within a month, and he was single again. Monica frowned in mock sympathy and said it was a shame that he was wasting his youth. Then, glancing at Daniel flirtatiously, she added that he was still more energetic and attractive than most younger men. Meanwhile, Seshan had been quietly peeking out from his room window, observing the two of them. He found Monica's balloons overwhelming, even a bit shocking. He thought to himself that he had never seen someone with that kind of stamina before. He shrugged off his guilt, reasoning that Monica wasn't even officially his stepmother, and besides, Daniel had a tendency to move on to new girlfriends anyway. As he peeked, Monica suddenly looked up and caught him watching. To his surprise, she winked at him playfully. Session's eyes widened in disbelief, and he quickly pulled away from the window, retreating into his room. His heart pounded as he wondered if he had imagined it, but he was certain Monica had definitely winked at him. That summer marked a turning point in Sahan's life. He had just turned 20 years old. The weather was hot, the days long, and everything had seemed relatively peaceful until one afternoon when an unexpected ring echoed from Daniel's doorbell. Standing on the doorstep were two unfamiliar girls, both appearing nervous yet determined. Without waiting for permission, they stepped inside the house and directly confronted Daniel. One of them looked at him intently and asked a question that immediately filled the air with tension. Was he their father? An unfamiliar energy swept through the house, unsettling Session, who had been used to a calm and quiet home environment. The blonde girl among them stepped further inside, and Session, slightly annoyed, pointed out that she should remove her shoes. She looked confused, asking why, but Sichan didn't respond. Instead, he thought to himself that his peaceful domain, which had been his sanctuary, had now officially been invaded. The two girls followed Daniel into the study room, where they began explaining everything. Seiken and Monica, curious and anxious, peered in from just outside. Seiken whispered that the situation seemed serious and told Monica to hang on, while Monica burst out in disbelief. She exclaimed loudly that none of this made any sense, asking how something so bizarre could happen so suddenly. Her voice rose in pitch as she continued to question Daniel's claim were these girls truly his biological daughters? One had blonde hair and a distinctly different appearance, while the other bore a faint resemblance to him. Sechan tried to calm Monica down, telling her to be quiet as he couldn't hear anything with her shouting. His curiosity got the better of him again, and he leaned in to listen. After a while, Daniel and the girls emerged from the study, and Daniel, now calmer, asked what all the fuss outside had been about. He noted that the earlier chaos had passed and that it was time for proper introductions. Gesturing toward the girls, he introduced the blonde one as Rebecca and the other as Michelle. He added, with a gentle smile, that they were both the same age as Sakantwenty years old. Session was visibly puzzled. He tilted his head and asked how they could be the same age. That would mean Daniel had fathered them both within the same year. The implication stunned him, and he voiced it aloud. Embarrassed, Daniel quickly reached out and placed his hand over Sekan's mouth, signaling him to stop talking. Realizing an explanation was necessary, Daniel began recounting what had happened 2 decades earlier. He had traveled alone to Vietnam and stayed in a modest guest house. During his time there, he met 2 women, one was European, the other Asian. Being Latin himself, the 3 of them had come from vastly different cultures and backgrounds, but youth and adventure had drawn them close. They quickly became friends and, as Daniel put it with a sheepish smile, ended up spending several passionate days together. He admitted that he had been called a playboy back then, and the consequences of those short-lived romances were the 2 young women now standing before them. He explained that Rebecca's mother had recently passed away due to a chronic illness, leaving her with no one to rely on. Rebecca, tall and elegant, had found herself alone. Michelle's situation was different. Their mother was about to marry a man who did not approve of women with children, forcing Michelle to become independent and find her own way in life. At that point, Monica interrupted again. She wasn't satisfied with the story and asked Daniel how he could be so sure that these girls were truly his daughters. She wanted to know if he had verified it properly. Daniel responded calmly, saying he had checked their mother's documents, conducted genetic and blood tests, and even confirmed their birth dates. He had spoken to Michelle's mother directly, ensuring there were no uncertainties. Still skeptical, Monica insisted she wanted to see the evidence herself. But before Daniel could respond, Rebecca spoke up. She said that it wasn't Monica's decision to make and added, somewhat coldly, that from what she had heard, Monica wasn't even family. That statement infuriated Monica, who demanded to know what Rebecca had just said. Tensions rose quickly between them, and it looked like an argument was about to break out. Sensing the escalation, Daniel stepped in firmly. He told them both to stop. He made it clear that he had already made his decision. They would all live together from that day forward. He admitted that he hadn't raised Rebecca or Michelle, but he considered them his daughters all the same and intended to take full responsibility for them. He urged everyone to be kind and respectful toward one another, emphasizing that they were now a family, and family deserved love and courtesy. Rebecca, trying to de-escalate the situation, apologized and said she'd take the blame for the earlier tension, offering a polite, "she is sorry." Daniel, preparing to leave for work, turned to Seshan and gave him a new responsibility. He was to be their guide. He told Seshan to teach them everything he had been taught and to help them adjust to their new life. Seshan hesitated but eventually agreed. He took their luggage and led the girls down the hallway toward their rooms. As they walked, Rebecca noticed Seshan's confused expression. She asked what was on his mind, but he shrugged it off, saying it was nothing. Internally, however, he couldn't shake a heavy feeling in his heart. Being adopted himself, he had grown up with love and care, lacking nothing. But now he realized that these 2 girls had spent their childhoods without a father figure. The thought unsettled him. When they reached the bedroom, he informed them that this would be their shared space. Rebecca looked around, impressed. She remarked that the room was bigger than hers had ever been. She seemed genuinely excited. Seishan clarified that the rooms were actually the same size. It was just the arrangement of the furniture that gave the illusion of space. In fact, he noted, their bed was smaller than his. Michelle pointed toward a door near the corner of the room and asked what lay beyond it. Seishan replied that it was a connecting door to his own room. Rebecca, still curious, asked him why his name was Kang Seishan and whether he had an English name. Seichan explained that Daniel had once asked if he wanted to change it, but since he had been called Seishan for as long as he could remember, it felt most familiar to him. Rebecca then asked if he truly considered Daniel his family. She pointed out that he had grown up in a large house and attended colleges. Surely life had been comfortable for him. Session wasn't sure how to interpret her tone. Was she being sincere or condescending? The uncertainty made him uncomfortable. Before the conversation could continue, Michelle asked them to leave so she could change. Seichan nodded and told her to rest, acknowledging that she had traveled a long way. Elsewhere, Daniel and Monica were driving together. During the ride, Monica asked if they were seriously going to live together from now on, just like that after suddenly discovering he had two grown daughters. Daniel laughed softly and asked why she was so anxious. He said it was a good thing that their family had grown unexpectedly. Monica raised an eyebrow and teased him, wondering aloud when exactly he had become such a dedicated family man, considering his notorious playboy past. Daniel smiled and replied that he was 50 years old now. He admitted that he had started to feel the desire to build something stable, a solid company, a loving family, and a future with reliable children. He added that having a woman to settle down with made the idea of growing older feel more meaningful. Monica looked at him incredulously and asked if he was joking. Was he really planning to settle down with just one woman? Daniel looked at her with sincerity and said that meeting a beautiful woman like her had changed his perspective. To him, settling down meant waking up beside her every morning. Monica, still processing his words, told him to stop the car. Then they start wrestling. Back at home, Seishan lay on his bed, restless. His thoughts kept drifting back to Rebecca. He couldn't deny that she seemed to have a complicated personality, yet she was undeniably beautiful. Stunning, even. And her figure only made it harder for him to keep his mind clear. But the shame of his thoughts quickly set in. What was he thinking? This girl was going to be part of his family now. He told himself he was out of his mind and needed some air. He stepped outside and walked into the lawn, hoping the fresh air would help. There, to his surprise, he found Rebecca practicing yoga. From the shadows, he observed her movements. She was graceful, focused, and clearly well practiced in her morning routine. Suddenly, she noticed him. Session froze, unsure of what to do now that she had caught him staring. Embarrassed, he decided to play it cool, walked over to greet her casually. He smiled awkwardly and asked what she was up to. Rebecca paused her pose, looked at him curiously, and asked, "So you came here?" Sechin approached Rebecca in the garden, surprised to see her there, and asked softly what she was doing outside so early. Rebecca called him over casually and invited him to join her in a few rehab stretches. Without hesitation, she began instructing him on the poses, demonstrating how to hold his stance. As he clumsily tried to follow, she laughed and guided him further, gesturing for him to press her legs gently to assist with the stretch. Uncertain but obedient, Seishan complied, placing his hands along her legs and pressing with caution. She nodded approvingly and told him to keep going just like that. Meanwhile, inside the house, Michelle wandered into Daniel's study. Alone in the room, she moved slowly, taking in her surroundings and silently observing the details of her father's personal space. Back in the garden, Sekan continued helping Rebecca with her rehabilitation. She directed him again on how to stretch her legs properly. He followed along, all the while thinking that the view from his position was quite something. Rebecca teasingly told him he was pathetically weak and just pretending to be okay. Her blunt comment made him pause and wonder whether he really appeared that feeble to her. He murmured that no one had ever called him weak before. Just then, Michelle appeared, walking into the garden and interrupting them. She asked how much longer they were going to take. Session jumped back in surprise and asked her what she needed. Michelle replied calmly that she wanted to find some kitchen utensils, but didn't know where they were. Grateful for the distraction, Session offered to help and quickly accompanied her to the kitchen. Once there, he pointed out the cabinets and drawers, showing her where the pots and other tools were kept. Michelle began preparing ingredients, and Seishan asked whether she was hungry and if he should go out and buy something for her. She replied that she wasn't cooking out of hunger, she simply wanted to try making a few dishes before the others arrived. His curiosity piqued. Seishan asked if she was referring to Daniel and commented that she looked tired and could simply rest instead. After all, Daniel had mentioned they might go out for dinner. Michelle shook her head and explained that she preferred to practice cooking, regardless. Sechan, trying to make conversation, asked if she was studying for a culinary certificate or specializing in European or Asian cuisine. Michelle grew visibly irritated his questions. She asked him bluntly to stop talking, saying she needed silence to concentrate on the cooking. Sechan quickly apologized, told her to call him if she needed anything, and left her in peace. That evening, the family gathered around the dining table. Michelle had prepared several dishes for everyone. As they began to eat, Daniel took a bite and looked astonished. He turned to Michelle and asked with disbelief whether she had really made all the food. Seishan chimed in, smiling and nodding proudly, saying that he had tried a bit earlier and found it amazing. Monica, who had been silently tasting the food, was also surprised by how delicious it was. Daniel looked fondly at Michelle and remarked that it was no wonder her mother had been an excellent cook as well. He added that it was admirable to see Michelle putting in such effort, even in a place that was still unfamiliar to her. He said he was proud that she was working so hard to support the family. Hearing this, Michelle stood up from her chair. Daniel looked at her, puzzled, and asked if she had something to say. Without responding at first, Michelle stepped forward and suddenly embraced him. Her voice trembled as she told him that she was deeply happy he had liked the meal. She admitted that since childhood she had always wanted to hear praise from her father, even just a little. Daniel smiled warmly and reassured her that there would be plenty more praise to come. The others at the table were stunned by the sudden emotional exchange. Sachan, observing Michelle, reflected on how curt and distant she had seemed earlier. The atmosphere now felt completely different. He wondered how someone who had appeared so cold was now radiating warmth. As the meal continued, Rebecca leaned over from her chair to reach for a side dish. In doing so, she brushed her arm against Sachan's, and to his surprise, she didn't move it away. She commented softly that the food was delicious as she reached for more. Sechan, distracted, couldn't help but notice her closeness and physical contact. Monica, seated across the table, took note of their behavior. Her gaze shifted from the two of them to Daniel, as if silently pondering what exactly was unfolding in their new, complicated family dynamic. After dinner, all the family members retreated to their respective rooms to rest. Session lay on his bed, lost in thought, replaying the events that had occurred between him and Rebecca. He kept wondering if what she had done was truly accidental. In his mind, it felt unmistakably intentional, and he couldn't make sense of the whole situation. Meanwhile, Daniel sat alone in his room, snacking and drinking alcohol to unwind. Monica joined him shortly after, asking how long he had been awake and whether he had been unable to sleep. Noticing his distant demeanor, she inquired further about what had him so deep in thought that he found himself drinking alone. Daniel admitted that he felt a strange restlessness and, for reasons he couldn't fully articulate, sleep had eluded him. When Monica pressed gently, asking what was bothering him, Daniel responded that it was difficult to put into words, but the experience of seeing his children grow up so well had left him with a peculiar feeling. He explained that lately, his life seemed to have gained richness and depth, and that he was beginning to feel the need for a stable family life before growing any older. Monica quietly reflected that perhaps his earlier comments hadn't been as casual as they seemed. She then hesitantly brought up Rebecca, asking what he truly thought about her. When Daniel asked her what she meant, Monica elaborated, saying that Rebecca's way of dressing seemed a bit excessive. Though Rebecca was an adult now, Monica admitted she didn't feel entirely comfortable with the way she carried herself. Daniel asked what point she was trying to make, and Monica cautiously suggested that since Seishan and Rebecca weren't biologically related and were both adults, didn't he think that could become a complicated situation? After all, one day a beautiful blonde had suddenly appeared in his daughter's life, and it wasn't entirely far-fetched to consider the implications. Daniel smiled gently at her, assuring her that there was no way either he or Sakan would ever look at Rebecca in such a way. He believed her usual attire wasn't as provocative as Monica was suggesting. Monica clarified that wasn't exactly what she meant, and Daniel playfully added that if someone truly beautiful were to be considered a threat, it would be Monica herself, not Rebecca. Laughing, Monica replied that comparing her to someone who hadn't even fully lost her baby fat wasn't quite fair. Daniel agreed with a grin and told her to stop overthinking things. He explained that he trusted Sikan more than anyone else and reminded her that his heart belonged to her alone. Looking at him, Monica asked if she should believe what he was saying. Daniel leaned in, suggesting that words weren't enough, they should exercise together. Monica, surprised by his sudden shift in tone, asked what he was doing and warned that the kids might wake up. Daniel teasingly questioned her concern, implying she didn't believe him. She laughed and remarked that it suddenly felt hot in the room. He admitted he'd had a drink and now craved something more than just snacks. Hinting toward a more excited moment, he insisted he wanted a cardio session with her. Monica playfully offered herself as his partner, and he flirted back, saying he could never refuse a woman like her. Unbeknownst to them, Michelle was standing upstairs, silently watching the scene unfold. The following morning, a cleaning session was already underway in the house. Rebecca, having just woken up, appeared frustrated and asked aloud why it was so noisy. Seikyun, already up and about, reminded her that he had told her before once a week, people came to clean and maintain the house. Though it might be loud, he encouraged her to endure it. Daniel and Monica, now fully dressed, joined them. Daniel cheerfully asked if everyone had slept well. Seikon, noticing Daniel's elegant outfit, commented with admiration, asking where the two were headed. Daniel explained that he had a short meeting with a buyer in Canberra and that the trip could last a few days, depending on potential delays. Monica added that she was also planning to return home. Before leaving, Daniel turned to Sachan and entrusted him with looking after the house. Sachan assured him not to worry, he had it under control. Michelle chimed in with a wish for her father's safe travels, to which Daniel replied with warmth, saying they would all enjoy some fresh air together once he returned. Michelle approached Monica and complimented her appearance, saying she looked truly beautiful and that her dress was very pretty. Monica smiled and thanked her graciously. Michelle then noticed that the zipper of Monica's dress had become entangled with her hair and gently helped fix it. Monica, touched by the gesture, thanked her again and remarked that they would be back soon. It was time for them to leave. Before stepping out, Monica leaned closer to Daniel and commented on how Michelle seemed like a genuinely good child. Daniel nodded and brought up how many people had praised his outfit, pointing out Monica's excellent fashion sense. She grinned proudly and reminded him that she had managed to obtain a rare, limited edition item. Then the two of them finally left the house together. Left behind in the now quieter home were Seshan, Rebecca, and Michelle. Sekin found himself pondering what to do next. The atmosphere felt somewhat awkward now that only the three of them remained. Rebecca turned to him, mentioning that she'd heard there was a nice beach nearby. He agreed, noting that the house was already a mess, and suggested they head out. He offered to show her around the town while they were at it. From upstairs, Michelle called down, letting them know she wouldn't be joining. She said she was tired and would be staying in her room and wished them safety. Seishan glanced up at her, wondering why she had directed her words specifically at him. Michelle, now in her room, quietly examined a teardrop-shaped, expensive-looking brooch in her hand, the very one she had stolen from Monica's dress. Seishan had taken Rebecca into the garage, where he gestured toward the collection of vehicles and told her to take her pick. He asked which one she'd prefer to ride. Rebecca, visibly surprised by the number of luxury cars neatly arranged before her, asked why there were so many of them. Sekin explained that it was because his father, whom he called Daddy, had a deep love for cars. He then suggested the convertible, claiming it was perfect for a scenic drive. However, Rebecca pointed toward the motorcycle and said that she preferred that one instead. Session, slightly surprised but agreeable, responded by confirming her choice and saying, "That one, okay." Soon after, the two of them hopped onto the bike, with Rebecca seated behind Seishan. As they began riding, she asked whether that was all the speed it had and if it could go any faster. Seshan told her to hold on tightly, and without further delay, they sped off toward the beach. Upon reaching the beach, Seishan turned to her and asked if the place was suitable, commenting that it was well maintained. Rebecca responded that it wasn't bad at all and said she actually liked it, then asked if they should start having some fun. She untied her hair, letting it down, which prompted Seishan to ask what she was doing. She questioned back if he wasn't going to join her, and he responded that he was on his way. Just then, a boy unexpectedly appeared and accidentally flung a clump of sand that landed directly on Seshan's head. Visibly annoyed, Seshan looked up, only to realize the boy was someone from the school's rugby team. The boy, clearly startled by what had happened, apologized and asked if Seshan was all right. As Seshan looked at him more closely, he recognized the girl standing beside the boy. It was Anna, his ex-girlfriend. Surprised, Seshan asked Anna if she was really there. The boy, whose name turned out to be Chris, turned toward Anna and asked sarcastically if Seishan was the guy she had dated before the Asian guy. He mocked the idea, questioning why she would date someone with such a name, and insinuated that it must have been for money. Anna, visibly uncomfortable, scolded Chris for his behavior. It began to dawn on Seishan that Chris's behavior might be entirely intentional and targeted. Chris then turned to Seshan and, with a mocking tone, asked what the grumpy expression on his face was about. Seshan ignored the provocation and instead walked toward Anna, telling her that if she was going to date someone, she should at least choose a decent guy, implying that someone like Chris wasn't worth her. He added that she was too precious to be wasting her time with someone like him. Chris, now irritated, demanded to know what Seshan was even trying to say. At that moment, Rebecca appeared from behind, grabbed Seshan's arm, and asked what was going on. Chris, stunned by her sudden appearance, couldn't hide his shock. He struggled to believe that Rebecca could actually be Seshan's girlfriend. He wondered to himself if Seshan had won her over with money, noting how beautiful and elegant she was. While Seshan tried to make sense of the sudden confrontation, Chris turned to Rebecca and asked if she would like to play a game, proposing that the loser would buy beer. To his surprise, Rebecca accepted the challenge with enthusiasm, telling him to bring it on. Anna, clearly taken aback by Chris's impulsiveness, asked if he was serious and what game he was even talking about. Chris replied that it would be fun and insisted they play. The game of beach volleyball soon began. During the match, Rebecca launched a strong spike that landed directly on Chris's face, causing his nose to bleed and leaving him unable to defend himself. She then addressed him sternly, saying that he wasn't as special as he thought and certainly not considerate. As Chris lay on the ground unconscious, Anna rushed over and desperately tried to wake him up, urging him to open his eyes. People at the beach began gathering around to see what had happened. Meanwhile, Rebecca took Seshan's hand and led him away to a quieter corner of the beach. The two of them began drinking beer together. Seshan remarked about Chris's swollen face, speculating that it would probably take a week for the swelling to go down. He told her that one couldn't show weakness in front of guys like Galt Chris. The more weakness shown, the more one ended up being ridiculed. Seshan admitted that he was familiar with this kind of behavior and had experienced it since he was young. He said that boys like Chris often looked at him like he was a nobody. He also mentioned that Michelle had once said something similar. Rebecca expressed mild surprise and said that if he knew that, then he probably already understood her perspective. As she took another drink of beer, Second asked if she and Michelle had grown up together. Rebecca shook her head and explained that they had only met recently at her mother's funeral. At the time, she had assumed Michelle was just another mourner and had no idea that they were actually half-sisters. He asked gently whether she was doing all right, given that her mother had passed away not too long ago. Seshan then opened up about his own past, explaining that when his parents died when he was young, he had struggled immensely. He said he couldn't talk to anyone and cried a lot. However, he was able to overcome that pain thanks to his daddy, who had truly supported him. He added that if Rebecca was ever having a hard time, she could count on him as well, because they were family. Rebecca, looking distant, said that she liked her family, but then asked a curious question whether Seshan actually felt like they were siblings. He responded earnestly, saying that of course they were, since she was his daddy's daughter after all. Rebecca scoffed and called him a hypocrite. She said she wasn't going to stay with him for long anyway, so what was the point in talking about family? Confused, Seshan asked what she meant by that. She told him it should have been obvious she resented him for taking the place that should have been hers and growing up wealthy. She urged him to become independent as soon as possible. Seshan, trying to reason with her, asked why she was being like that. He said he truly believed their father still thought of her as family and wanted to accept her. Rebecca didn't respond to that directly. Instead, she suggested they begin a cardio session right there. Seshan, puzzled, asked what she was doing. She taunted him, saying he probably couldn't see her clearly because he had been staring at her body all day, and that maybe he didn't really see her as family. She asked if she was wrong. Second asked her to stop, but she went on, claiming that being a hypocrite was worse than getting excited about seeing one's family. She called him pathetic, saying he didn't even have the guts to be honest with himself. And at that moment, Seshan found himself deeply conflicted, wondering silently whether she was right, whether he truly lacked the courage to face his feelings. Seshan had made up his mind to begin a cardio session with Rebecca. But just when he was ready, she didn't appear so willing anymore. Her resistance was obvious as she demanded to know what he thought he was doing, urging him to let her go. His frustration surfaced quickly, and he responded coldly, questioning why he should stop. He reminded her of her earlier words, accusing her of assuming he didn't have the courage to act like this. He pointed out that she had said it herself that he lacked the guts. Rebecca retorted fiercely, shouting that he couldn't force her to go through this workout. She even threatened to kill him if he didn't back off. Session stood stunned, thinking how unusual her reaction was. Meanwhile, back at the house, Michelle was seen thanking the cleaning staff as they finished up. She expressed gratitude for their hard work, and one of the workers smiled, saying they would be back again next week. After they left, Michelle walked quietly into her father's study. Once inside, she began scanning the bookshelves, pulling out volumes one by one and flipping through them. As she sifted through the books, she thought to herself that none of them seemed particularly interesting or out of place. Still, her behavior suggested that she had a purpose for being there. She appeared focused, perhaps searching for something specific, convinced that whatever she needed to find had to be somewhere in that room. Elsewhere by the beach, Seshan and Rebecca continued the exercise. Rebecca looked drained and breathless, begging for it to stop. But Sikyan noticed something odd while her words were filled with resistance. Her body didn't push him away with much strength. Her face had turned red, sweat clung to her skin, and though she was being rude, her physical reaction seemed to contradict her tone. Again, she threatened that she would kill him, but suddenly the atmosphere changed. Chris arrived at the beach with a group of his friends, all of them looking around and calling out Sekhan's name. Chris expressed frustration, convinced that Seshan had already escaped. One of his friends questioned the effort they were putting in, suggesting they just give up and relax instead. Hearing them nearby, Sekhan quickly dragged Rebecca behind a large rock for cover. Alarmed, he thought to himself how bizarre it was that Chris had actually brought a group of people to hunt him down. It felt absurd. He crouched lower, trying to stay out of sight. Chris's friends began to question him curiously. One asked if it was true that he got hit by a girl. Chris snapped at him to shut up, saying he had simply let his guard down. Another friend, still confused, asked why Chris seemed to hate the Asian guys so much. Chris admitted that he felt insulted by the fact that Se-chan had dated his ex-girlfriend. He added darkly that once he found them, he would show them what karma looked like. Still hiding behind the rock, Se-chan and Rebecca tried to keep quiet and finish their exercise session in whispers. Se-chan told her that maybe they should stop now. Then, he urged her to stay silent, reminding her of the consequences if they got caught. He noted to himself that although she kept protesting, she was already soaked with sweat. Her body language spoke differently than her words. Meanwhile, Chris's friend shifted the topic, asking if the girl Chris was talking about was really that special. Chris replied smugly that she was indeed amazing and said he was planning to catch her and punish her. The friend, in a casual tone, then asked if they could possibly trade if Chris could give him Anna instead. Chris looked both angry and confused, demanding to know what his friend was talking about. The friend, unfazed, pointed out that Chris wasn't seriously dating her and was also seeing someone named Sarah. Chris admitted that even though he had no intention of dumping Anna, he still hadn't explored everything with her. He commented that Sekhan had proven to be more trained than he had anticipated. The friend grinned, saying that if things worked out with Sarah, Chris could always hand over Anna to him. From behind the rock, Se-chan was listening to the entire exchange, feeling disgusted by what he was hearing. He thought to himself that they were all just garbage. Still, he knew this wasn't the time to confront them. He couldn't afford to be caught. At that moment, one of Chris's friends noticed a beer bottle lying near the rocks. He looked down and pointed out that there were 2 sets of footprints in the sand. Chris grew suspicious immediately, wondering aloud if Se-chan and Rebecca were hiding somewhere close. Se-chan had just come to a disturbing realization. Chris and his friends were nearby, and they were moments away from getting caught. Panic began to rise in his chest as he thought about what would happen if they were discovered. It wasn't just about him anymore. If Rebecca got caught with him, the consequences might be even worse for her. His thoughts spiraled as he crouched behind the rock, desperate to think of a way out. Chris, suspicious, stepped closer to the rock and mentioned to his friend that something about it seemed odd. Sekhan's heart pounded. It felt like they were about to be exposed. He held his breath, trying to hide as best as he could. Then, out of nowhere, Anna stormed onto the scene, yelling furiously at Chris. She demanded to know how he could break up with her just because they hadn't done a workout session together. Her voice was loud and sharp as she declared she never wanted to see him again, nor his trashy friend. Chris, startled and flustered, stammered that he had only been joking. With that, he and his friend quickly backed off and walked away. As the coast cleared, Sishan peeked out from behind the rock, whispering a relieved, "Thank God!" But his relief was short-lived. Rebecca, now furious, slapped him across the face. Her voice trembled with hurt as she accused him of causing her pain. Sishan followed after her, trying to explain, but she turned and warned him to stay away unless he wanted trouble. She pushed his hand away with disgust. Eventually, they returned home. By then, Seshan had fully realized the weight of what had happened. Rebecca was clearly angry, and he couldn't blame her. Still caught up in his thoughts, he didn't notice Michelle standing behind them until she spoke up. She casually commented that it looked like they had a fight, though she didn't know the details. Then she added that Rebecca was strange anyway, so she often tried to avoid speaking to her. Sishan looked at Michelle in surprise, thinking that she had no idea how serious the situation really was. Michelle advised him to take a shower, saying they'd have dinner afterward. She mentioned she would go get Rebecca. He nodded silently and went to freshen up. Meanwhile, Rebecca sat alone in her room, deep in thought. The entire beach incident replayed in her mind. She couldn't believe what had happened. She had seen Sishan as nothing more than a naive kid, but now she felt betrayed. What he had done was beyond forgiveness. Michelle entered the room, raising an eyebrow as she asked if things were going according to Rebecca's plan. Rebecca smirked and assured her not to worry. In her view, guys were simple, they just needed to be manipulated a little and they'd go crazy. Michelle wasn't convinced. She asked bluntly if Rebecca just didn't know how to keep a boyfriend. Laughing it off, Rebecca told her she clearly didn't understand men and should sit back and watch her work. As Michelle looked around the room, she remarked that it was larger than hers. Rebecca changed the topic, asking if Michelle was handling things on her end. Michelle confidently replied that everything was under control, assuring Rebecca that the girl she was targeting would be pushed out soon. Downstairs, Sekin sat at the dining table, imagining the worst. His thoughts wandered to what might happen if Rebecca told Michelle everything. In his mind, he pictured his uncle, his daddy, furious, shouting at him for betraying the family. He imagined being thrown out of the house with nothing. Coming back to reality, Seshan scolded himself. He couldn't believe how far things had gone. He hadn't meant for any of it to happen. He blamed Rebecca for provoking him, trying to convince himself that it wasn't entirely his fault. Just then, Rebecca and Michelle joined him at the table. Michelle teased that Rebecca didn't seem to enjoy the beach trip and claimed she'd come back disappointed. Seshan looked surprised and repeated, "Really?" Michelle smiled and told them to focus on dinner. He mumbled that he thought Rebecca liked it. Quietly, he realized she had told Michelle a different version of the story, probably because she was too embarrassed to share what actually occurred. In the middle of dinner, Seshan received a call from his uncle. He picked up, telling him they were all having dinner. Michelle quickly asked him to switch it to a video call. Once he did, Michelle's expression lit up. She greeted their father warmly and asked if he had arrived safely. He replied that he had just gotten time to call after a busy arrival. Then he asked if they were all doing well. Michelle answered enthusiastically that they were getting along fine and there was no need for concern. Rebecca also joined in, casually mentioning that Sishan had taken her to the beach. Their father smiled at the news and said it made him happy to hear that his children were spending time together. Rebecca added that he should enjoy his trip and not worry about them. Sichan, however, couldn't hide his confusion. He stared at Rebecca, wondering why she was putting up such an act. Later that night, Sichan lay on his bed, staring at his phone. He remembered the harsh words Rebecca had thrown at him, how she hated him for taking her place and growing up with privilege. She had told him to leave as soon as possible. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. Unable to sit still, he got out of bed and stepped into the hallway. In the TV lounge, he noticed Michelle had fallen asleep in front of the television. He watched her quietly, thinking that she must have dozed off. For a moment, he reflected on how Michelle and Rebecca didn't seem especially close despite living under the same roof. Meanwhile, Rebecca was still in her room, thinking about what had happened. Frustration churned inside her. The memory of the beach incident was fresh, and she couldn't believe she had let her guard down. The very idea that she had considered someone like Seshan as more than a foolish kid now embarrassed her. It was humiliating. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. Annoyed, she wondered who could be disturbing her at such an hour. Instead of answering, she turned off the light and pretended to be asleep. Quietly, Seshan entered the room, assuming she was already sleeping. As he stepped closer and watched her lying there, he realized that he had come hoping to talk. Looking at her face in the dim light, he thought to himself how beautiful she was. Rebecca, pretending to sleep, was fully aware of his presence and wished he would just leave. But he didn't. Instead, he gently reached out and held her hand. Rebecca's mind raced. What was he trying to do? At the same time, Seishan was battling his own impulse, uncertain of what to say or how to act. Something about the moment pulled at him, and though he didn't quite understand it, he knew one thing. He wanted to be closer to her. And so he made a decision in that moment that would join her in her workout session with her. He was looking at her and thinking to himself how irritating it was that she was still pretending to be asleep. Hypocrisy, he thought, was the worst kind of behavior. Yet, he decided to test her patience and wondered how long she could keep up the act. She, meanwhile, was feigning sleep and wondering just how far he intended to push this game. Suddenly, he opened her eyes and told her to stop. She explained that she had pretended to be asleep so he wouldn't feel embarrassed, but added firmly that they couldn't go any further before she slapped him again. Despite this, he was determined not to show any weakness in front of her. He teased, asking if she was really just trying to avoid embarrassment or if she was secretly enjoying his foreplay. She responded by telling him he had gone crazy and demanded that he leave her room. He grabbed her hand and shouted, questioning what she was doing. He reminded her that she had gotten very excited when he trained her during the yoga session earlier. She insisted he let her go and called him a weird man, but internally he found it strange how her cursing seemed to excite him. She threatened to kill him, but he urged her to accept it and stop pretending to be tough. He kept telling her to stop lying, realizing now that he had some control over her. Meanwhile, Michelle, who had been resting on the couch in the TV room, woke up and thought she must have dozed off. She reminded herself that it would be a waste to sleep there when she had a nice bed waiting for her. In another scene, Sechan was doing a gaming session with Rebecca and noticed that she was much more cooperative than before. It was the first time she had said, "please," to him, which caught his attention. He asked her what was causing the frustrated look on her face. Rebecca said she couldn't believe him. Suddenly, both of them were shocked when Michelle entered Rebecca's room, turned on the light, and said she needed to talk to them. When Michelle saw Session and Rebecca Session wearing revealing clothes, she was very surprised and immediately asked what she was doing. Session was successfully hiding under the bed, careful not to make a sound. Meanwhile, Michelle was standing nearby, questioning Rebecca rather sharply about why she was wearing such revealing clothes. Rebecca shot back without hesitation, telling Michelle that it was none of her business and that she should mind her own affairs. She added, somewhat sarcastically, that white people tended to run warmer than Asians and questioned what exactly Michelle wanted to talk about. Rebecca made it clear that she was tired and urged Michelle to get to the point quickly. She insisted that since it was just the two of them there, it was the perfect chance to discuss their plan. Rebecca emphasized that if their plan was going to succeed smoothly, gaining Daniel's trust was absolutely crucial. Sachan, sitting behind the bed, listened carefully and thought to himself, wondering what plan Rebecca was talking about. Rebecca told Michelle she didn't need to repeat herself and suggested they postpone the discussion until the next day. Michelle, clearly frustrated by Rebecca's dismissive attitude, asked her if she was seriously going to behave like that. They had agreed to keep things civil between them, after all, but Rebecca was acting so annoying. Michelle's tone showed how exasperated she was. Rebecca finally agreed to talk the next day, turned off the light, and told Michelle to leave the room. As Michelle exited, Sishan crawled out from under the bed and approached Rebecca. He asked her what that whole exchange was about, curious about the plan she had mentioned. Rebecca told him simply that they needed to gain Daddy's trust for the plan to work. Sishan asked if that was really all there was to it. Rebecca responded with irritation, warning him that if he didn't leave immediately, she would scream. Sishan agreed and left without another word. The following day, Seshan was sitting in the yard beside the pool, soaking up the sun as he thought over recent events. He reflected on how they had crossed a certain line once already, yet Rebecca was still appearing in his dreams as if nothing had happened. This perplexed him deeply. He also found himself puzzling over what Michelle had said the previous day. admitting that he couldn't read her intentions at all. He hoped he had misunderstood things, just as Rebecca had suggested. Suddenly, Michelle appeared nearby, telling him that she was going for a swim. Seishin's face lit up with excitement as he told her the water wasn't that cold. As he looked at her, he was surprised to realize she was easier on the eyes than he had initially thought. Michelle noticed his distraction and asked why he seemed lost in thought. Seichan found himself thinking about Rebecca again, admiring how incredible her body was, despite the grumpy expression she often wore. Rebecca soon joined them in the pool and began swimming. Seichan, being a strong swimmer himself, admired her graceful movements and thought seriously that he could not find a single flaw in her appearance. Michelle observed the interaction quietly and thought to herself that Rebecca really needed to take charge and kick Seichan out of the house. She mused that framing him as a stalker would be the best way to get him gone. That was Rebecca's role now. After swimming for a while, Michelle got out of the pool and said she was going to take a break. Seichan settled beside Michelle and reflected on how, come to think of it, he hadn't seen many other Asians around, especially Asian women. He admired how smooth Rebecca's skin was compared to others. Suddenly, Rebecca asked him if he knew how to do the backstroke and begged him to teach her. She teased him about being good at freestyle, but not at backstroke, wondering why. She insisted it was just a matter of supporting her properly. They began swimming together, and Seichan noticed how being close to her again was making him feel excited. Rebecca teased him about glancing at Michelle's body earlier, which surprised him. He asked if he really had done that. She laughed and said he just couldn't help himself around women. He smiled and joked that she was teasing him again. To reassure her, he told her not to worry because she was far more beautiful than Michelle. He added that she had even appeared in his dreams the night before. Michelle, watching from the poolside, thought Rebecca was doing very well and that they would become close quickly. Deciding to get to work, she left the poolside to attend to other matters. Later, Rebecca shouted at Seichan, telling him not to put his hands on her just because they had exercised together once. Seichan responded that she actually liked it whenever they exercised together. She denied this, asking what he was talking about. Seichan said it was written all over her face that she got ready so easily, but he admitted that he liked being with her so much that he didn't even mind her cursing at him. Rebecca warned him not to mess with her. Seichan asked her honestly if she really hated exercising with him. She looked very embarrassed and said she wasn't sure because it was her first time doing exercise. When he asked what she meant, she explained that it was her first time doing a cardio session. Seichan looked at her and asked if she had been there the whole time, his thoughts drifting as he considered that despite Rebecca's temper, her body was undeniably stunning. With a mocking tone, he muttered that there was no way this could be her first time. Rebecca, picking up on his sarcasm, questioned him with annoyance, asking what was so strange about it. Was it really that unbelievable to think this was her first experience? Seichan replied, insisting that it wasn't just strange. It was more surprising because she had claimed she'd never trained before, yet she had confidently tried to guide him through all their previous workout sessions. Rebecca admitted that while she had done a bit of training and had been in a few relationships, she had never done a cardio session like this with anyone before. Seichan raised a brow, questioning if she expected him to believe she had dated guys and gotten physically close with them, yet had never gone as far as doing a cardio session. Rebecca told him there was no reason not to believe it. She confessed that whenever the time actually came to do it, she felt repulsed by the thought, so she always backed out. Inwardly, she began to wonder if maybe that was the moment when all the guys she dated ended up being scared off by her. Seichan wasn't convinced and pointed out that there had been no signs that this was her first time. Frustrated, Rebecca snapped at him, asking how he could dare to say something like that to a woman. She explained defensively that she had played a lot of sports since she was a kid, and maybe that's why her body was naturally more adaptable. Seichan nodded, trying to smooth things over, and said he had heard that athletes often had more experience with physical training and that their bodies tended to be more flexible and responsive. She glared at him and warned firmly that he should not touch her when there were other people around. He smirked and asked if that meant it was okay when no one else was around. Rebecca quickly shot down the suggestion, telling him that wasn't what she meant at all. She turned the question back on him. asking why he always seemed to touch her when others were watching. She told him bluntly that she thought she knew exactly what he was trying to do. Seichan asked her what she was talking about, pretending to be clueless, though a part of him wondered if she had caught on. Then he laughed, his voice mischief, and accused her of loving the attention she got from guys. Uh, he said she seemed to enjoy making them go crazy, teasing and pushing them to their limits, solely to stop short of actually engaging in the cardio session. But, he added proudly, he had succeeded where others had not. Rebecca stared at him in disbelief and told him he was out of his mind. He brushed her words aside and proposed that they figure it out once and for all. Did she actually like it, or did she hate it? She asked what he meant by that. He then suggested they perform a few wrestling-style training sessions. He promised that if she felt repulsed again, he would never try to teach her the cardio session ever again. Rebecca, alarmed by the idea, told him to stay away. But before she could move, her foot struck a rock, causing her to slip. Seichan quickly caught her in his arms and supported her. With a teasing grin, he said she had fallen down before he even had a chance to suggest it properly. Rebecca, flustered and angry, argued that whenever she was even slightly nice to him, he took it as permission to get too close. She warned him that if he didn't stop, she'd end it all and kill him. As she struggled to pull herself together, she couldn't help thinking how aggressive Seichan was. She reminded him that she had told him to stop the training. But in the back of her mind, another thought was creeping in. Every other guy had always stopped when she pushed them away, but Seichan wasn't like them. Meanwhile, inside, Michelle was calling Monica. She asked when Monica would be coming back and explained that she wanted to give Daddy a present before he returned the next day. However, something urgent had come up, so she hoped Monica could help. Michelle asked her if she could return today. Monica, concerned, asked what had happened. But when she heard it was for Daniel, she agreed, saying she'd see her soon. Hanging up the call, Monica thought to herself that Michelle seemed so thoughtful, and the more she got to know her, the more she appeared to be a genuinely nice person. Monica decided she needed to try harder too. She was determined to become a true part of Daniel's family. Meanwhile, Michelle was in her room, quietly trying to make a small cut on her finger to create a mild injury, an act that suggested she had something calculated in mind. Elsewhere, Rebecca and Seichan were now deep into what had become a far more intense cardio session. Seichan, half out of breath, admitted he wasn't quite ready for that, but Rebecca wasn't backing down. Meanwhile, Michelle had returned, but upon arriving at the place where they were supposed to be, she found it empty. Confused, she wondered where the two had gone. Just then, Rebecca appeared from the opposite direction, prompting Michelle to ask her why she had come from that way. Rebecca casually responded that she had taken that path because the shade there was nice. Michelle then inquired about Seichan's whereabouts, and Rebecca told her that he had left a while ago to get his motorcycle checked. Noticing something off, Rebecca asked Michelle what had happened to her hand, to which Michelle simply brushed it off, saying it was nothing. Unbeknownst to them, Seichan had been hiding behind the grassy barrier, quietly observing the two girls. He found himself thinking about how often he ended up hiding because of Rebecca. Michelle eventually suggested to Rebecca that they should head inside, and the two of them went back into the house. Still hiding, Seichan considered that since Rebecca thought he was out getting his motorcycle checked, he could take his time before returning. Wanting to clear his head, he decided to go to the beach and watch the sunset. As he sat there gazing at the horizon, he began to feel a heavy sense of regret wash over him. Now that he had calmed down, things didn't feel so good anymore. He asked himself what on earth he had done. The girl he couldn't stop thinking about was the daughter of the man who had shown him nothing but kindness. The thought of his daddy finding out filled him with dread. He knew Daniel would be deeply disappointed in him. And yet, every time he looked at Rebecca, all reason seemed to vanish. Now he was left feeling utterly ashamed of himself. Later that night, when he returned home, he noticed that the house was unusually quiet. Assuming everyone had retired to their rooms, he quietly made his way into Daniel's home office. Inside, he caught sight of a photo frame displaying a picture of him and Daniel together. Staring at it, he couldn't suppress the guilt and silently apologized, thinking to himself how sorry he truly was. Just then, Monica emerged from the bathroom, commenting on how refreshing the bath had been. But she stopped mid-sentence upon spotting Seichan unexpectedly in the room. Her surprise was evident, and Seshan, clearly flustered, immediately began backing away. She asked him what he was doing there, and he quickly replied that he hadn't realized she had returned and that he had only come in to visit his daddy's office. Without giving her time to question further, he rushed out of the room and headed back to his own. A little while later, Michelle was sitting with Monica and showing her a man's diary. Monica admired it and remarked that it looked very nice, asking if Michelle had made it herself for Daniel. Michelle nodded, explaining that she just needed to have his initials embossed on it, but had hurt her hand and apologized for making Monica do the work instead. Monica assured her not to worry and began helping her with the diary, acknowledging that Michelle must have worked very hard to injure herself like that. Michelle then asked whether Monica thought Daniel would like the gift, to which Monica responded with certainty that he definitely would. Meanwhile, Seshan had taken a seat on the nearby sofa, quietly listening in on their conversation. He couldn't help but feel awkward about the situation, especially after what had happened earlier in the room. But to his surprise, Monica didn't seem to be bothered by it in the slightest. As he sat in silence, Michelle turned to him and asked whether he was hungry, adding that they would have dinner as soon as the diary was finished. Sachan told her not to worry about him. Monica, noticing his presence, smiled and remarked that with how healthy he was, no wonder he had such an appetite. Michelle then turned to Monica and explained that she couldn't ask Rebecca to help with the delicate work because Rebecca hated doing such things. Monica simply reassured her not to stress and offered to finish it herself. At that moment, Rebecca was also making her way downstairs and happened to overhear the conversation. With a slightly guilty tone, she apologized for being clumsy. Michelle immediately told her to go sit down and promised she would prepare dinner soon. Rebecca walked over and sat next to Sekhan on the sofa. Looking at him, she asked why he looked so dazed and suggested he turn on the TV or something. Seshan glanced at her and couldn't help but think to himself that this house really was filled with the most beautiful women he had ever met. Rebecca started touching his protein bar. Seshan questioned Rebecca in a hushed but tense voice, asking what she was doing and reminding her that there were other people sitting right behind them. Meanwhile, Rebecca turned to Seshan and asked him how it felt when she played video games in that particular way, suggesting that he needed to understand what it was like to be trapped in such an uncomfortable and helpless situation. Seshan, clearly agitated, told her to stop, warning her that what she was doing was dangerous. Rebecca, unfazed, insisted that he wouldn't be able to escape without her preparation. At the same time, Monica continued assisting Michelle, confirming once more that she was supposed to do the diary task in the way Michelle had shown. Michelle responded with encouraging words, telling Monica that she was doing far better than expected. Monica beamed with happiness and excitement at the compliment. Turning her attention to Seshan, Monica remarked with a light chuckle that he must be feeling quite lucky to have two wonderful sisters in one day. Then, shifting the topic, she asked him why there was nothing good on the television and simultaneously thought to herself that he should be engaging in conversation with Rebecca in staring blankly at the screen. Monica felt the atmosphere had become slightly awkward after what had happened earlier, and sensed that the kids might be feeling too uncomfortable to speak openly in front of her. Seshan sat beside Rebecca with evident discomfort. Rebecca, watching his nervous expression, couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. Elsewhere in the room, Monica, turning more thoughtful, asked Michelle if she could ask her something a bit personal. She mentioned that adjusting to a new environment must be difficult and wondered if Michelle was facing any specific challenges. Michelle, however, replied with a smile that she wasn't having any trouble at all and that the place was actually quite nice. Monica pressed on, gently asking if Michelle missed her mother's, noting that she was still young and her mother must have been concerned about sending her so far away. Michelle's expression shifted slightly. She acknowledged that her mother must be worried, very worried, in fact, about whether she was doing well or not. Her voice carried a tone of detachment, and before the conversation could continue, Michelle abruptly stood up and offered Monica something to drink, suggesting juice. Monica, noticing the change in tone, politely asked for a glass of water instead, saying that concentrating so much had made her thirsty. As she watched Michelle walk away, Monica thought to herself that Michelle had once mentioned her mother was getting remarried. Perhaps that was the reason Michelle seemed sensitive about the topic and reluctant to talk further about her family situation. When Michelle returned and handed her the glass of water, Monica thanked her sincerely. As Michelle glanced toward where Seishan and Rebecca had been sitting, she noticed that Rebecca was no longer beside him. She turned to Seishan and asked where Rebecca had gone. Monica, too, directed the same question at him, and then added in a teasing tone that he wasn't even responding. Had he already fallen asleep? Michelle observed the strange silence and commented that they probably needed to finish their task quickly and prepare for dinner. Something had seemed off since earlier, and she began to question whether Sikan was really asleep at all. However, Sishan was far from asleep. He was quietly thinking to himself that he needed to stop Rebecca from whatever she was planning. Monica leaned in and moved closer to Sikan to check whether he had actually dozed off. To her shock, she realized that Rebecca was lying on the sofa in his lap, and not where she had been moments ago. Alarmed, Monica blurted out, asking what the two of them were doing. Monica stood in surprise as she saw both Seshan and Rebecca fast asleep, clearly deep in slumber. Speaking softly but with disbelief, she commented on the scene, wondering aloud what had gotten into them. She then called Michelle over to take a look as well, remarking that she couldn't believe how close the two had become, sleeping so peacefully together without a single care in the world. She guessed they must have been exhausted after all the swimming they had done earlier that day. Urging Michelle to help her finish up, she added that they should have dinner soon and suggested bringing a blanket for the sleeping pair, volunteering to do it herself. Later that night, Sekon sat alone beside the pool, his mind restless. He found himself replaying earlier events, his heart racing just from the memory. The thought of Monica approaching them had startled him, and he silently thanked Rebecca for acting quickly enough to prevent them from being caught. He found it strange how the more time they spent together, the more attractive she seemed to him. There was a chance she might lash out at him, and yet the way she still went along with whatever he suggested struck him as endearing. He wondered seriously for the first time, did he genuinely like Rebecca? Suddenly, Rebecca appeared by the pool, her voice sharp and decisive. She told him bluntly that she was putting a stop to everything, and warned him to keep his hands off her from now on. Seishan looked up in surprise and protested, reminding her that she had been the one to take the initiative earlier. She dismissed his words, expressing frustration that she always ended up on the losing side. Then, without further hesitation, she slapped him and snapped that he certainly hadn't looked like someone on the losing end. If anything, he'd seemed pretty confident. She ordered him to shut up and threatened that if he ever tried something like that again, she would tell Daniel everything. It was a clear warning. Despite the confrontation, Sakan gently grabbed her hand and urged her to sit beside him. Rebecca hesitated and asked what he was trying to do. He simply asked her to sit with him, promising he wouldn't do anything. Still unsure, she mentioned how strange it would look for her to sit out there with him at such a late hour. He calmly assured her that no one would find it odd. After all, no one had thought it was strange earlier when she had fallen asleep on his lap. He told her to just enjoy the night sky while she was there, explaining that this time of year was perfect for seeing meteor showers. At that moment, a meteor streaked across the sky. He pointed toward it, urging her to look. Rebecca, still irritated, muttered that she didn't care about meteorites, but Sechan kept his gaze on the sky, his tone suddenly softer. He confided that she was the first person who had made him feel such closeness since arriving in that unfamiliar place as a child, second only to their father. He assumed she must feel similarly about the environment, and added that if, once she had settled in, she still felt uncomfortable around him, she could go ahead and tell their father everything. If that happened, he would willingly leave the house, acknowledging that, in the end, she was their father's biological daughter. Just then, another meteor shot across the sky, larger and brighter than the last. Sechan pointed again and commented in amazement, joking about how, if that one crashed into Earth, it might cause a global disaster. Rebecca couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity and asked what he was even talking about. From a distance, Michelle observed the two of them quietly. In her mind, she noted that Rebecca was doing quite well and concluded that within the week, they would likely be able to push everyone else out of the way. Later on, Michelle went to Daniel and handed him a diary. He looked at it, touched, and asked whether she had made it herself for him. Michelle confirmed it with a warm smile, adding that both she and Rebecca had made it together, while Monica had embossed Daniel's initials on the cover. Rebecca chimed in, mentioning that Michelle had even injured her hand while working on it. Michelle, sounding a bit nervous, apologized for not being able to give him something nicer and said that if he didn't like it, she would understand. Daniel, however, was visibly emotional. He reassured them that he had never received such a thoughtful and sincere gift before. With heartfelt gratitude, he asked if he could hug them both. Wrapping his arms around them, he thanked them again, overwhelmed by the gesture. Sashan, observing from a distance, reflected that he had never given Daniel anything that meaningful before. Seeing how happy Daniel looked just from receiving that handmade diary made Sashan pause in quiet contemplation. Meanwhile, Daniel and Monica retreated to their room and began their usual cardio session. Monica looked at him closely and asked if something bad had happened during his recent business trip. Elsewhere in the house, Sekhan sat on the couch in the TV lounge, unable to sleep. His thoughts were consumed by Rebecca. He found himself longing to do some exercise with her again, despite the awkwardness earlier. Just then, Daniel appeared from behind and asked him what he was doing at such an hour. Caught off guard, Sekhan stammered, trying to explain that he had only been thinking about exercise. Daniel raised an eyebrow and asked whether he planned to stay awake much longer, mentioning that he had something to do in his office. He instructed Sishan to stop spacing out and go to bed. Sishan nodded and replied that he would. As Sishan made his way to his room, he tried to shake off his restless thoughts. He told himself that he needed to stop thinking about everything and just work out before going to sleep. However, before he could do that, Daniel suddenly called him from the office. Sichan turned around and walked in, asking what had happened. Daniel, looking somewhat serious, asked him whether anyone had entered the room recently. Daniel informed Seshan that someone had opened the safe in his office. Seshan, taken aback, asked who would even think of doing that and whether anything had gone missing. Daniel explained that although nothing had been stolen, their major contracts had been found out of order. Someone had clearly gone through the documents. Seiken speculated that the only others who ever entered the office were the cleaning staff. He suggested calling the police and having them check for fingerprints or other signs of tampering. Then Daniel asked Seiken if he had gone out and left Rebecca and Michelle alone in the house at any point. Sishan recalled that he had indeed gone out by himself the previous day. A thought suddenly occurred to him. Was Daniel actually beginning to suspect Rebecca and Michelle? Daniel pressed further, confirming that the two girls had been left alone in the house during that time. Seiken replied that they had, and he silently reflected that even though they were Daniel's daughters, they were still the newest members of the household. It was only logical to question every possibility. However, Daniel quickly dismissed the idea, reasoning aloud that it would have been nearly impossible for those two young girls to manage opening the safe. As Seiken moved closer to the bookshelf, something caught his eye. He bent down and pulled out an unfamiliar item, exclaiming with confusion about finding something like that down there. Daniel took the object from him and examined it closely. It was a brooch. He immediately recognized it as belonging to Monica. Daniel's demeanor changed instantly. Filled with suspicion, he stormed off to confront Monica. Demanding an explanation, he asked her why she had gone into his office. Monica looked genuinely confused and asked what he was talking about. Why would she go into his office? He held up the brooch and told her he had found it beneath the safe. Upstairs, Rebecca and Michelle listened intently, silently watching the confrontation unfold. Daniel insisted the brooch was an ornament from a dress he had once given Monica, a custom piece made by a renowned craftsman. He told her he remembered it vividly because it had been a unique design. Monica shook her head and replied that he must be mistaken. That dress, she claimed, was still at her own place. She reminded him that they had left together for his trip that morning. Turning to Sachan, Daniel asked if he and Rebecca had spent that day at the beach. Sachan confirmed that they had. Then Daniel addressed Michelle, asking whether she had been home alone that day. Michelle explained that she had gone out briefly to buy groceries for dinner. Monica's voice rose, her face flushed with indignation. She asked if Daniel was seriously accusing her of trying to steal from his safe. She challenged him to tell her what, if anything, was missing. She even offered to let him search her, sarcastically inviting him to do so if he really believed she was hiding something. Daniel demanded to see her bag. In a burst of frustration, Monica threw the bag toward him. It hit the floor, and its contents spilled everywhere. Monica yelled for him to check it thoroughly and see for himself if he found anything suspicious. Michelle quickly knelt down to help gather the scattered items, urging everyone to calm down. She gently asked Daniel to talk rationally and stop letting his emotions take over. Daniel's eyes landed on a small red object among the scattered items. He asked Michelle to hand it to him. She looked at it and gave it to him without protest. It was a red USB drive. Daniel plugged it into the computer and asked Sachan to check its contents. Sachan clicked through the files, then froze. With a stunned voice, he confirmed that the USB indeed contained photos of the company's confidential contracts. Monica looked just as shocked. She insisted that she had no idea how that USB ended up in her bag. She denied everything, asking Daniel if their first meeting at the client gala had been part of his suspicion as well. Daniel, consumed by anger and betrayal, shouted at her to leave the house immediately or he would call the police. Tears welled in Monica's eyes as she gathered her luggage and walked out of the house, crying. The next morning, Seichan went to check on Daniel, who sat in his office, visibly disturbed and overwhelmed. Seichan silently noted how tense the atmosphere had become throughout the house. He still couldn't believe Monica could do something like that. To him, she had always seemed like a good person. Out in the lawn, Rebecca and Michelle were seated together, whispering quietly. Michelle remarked that they had successfully gotten rid of Monica, and now the only remaining obstacle was to deal with the boy. Rebecca responded that she understood and reminded Michelle not to rush her. Michelle went on to say that she had received a call earlier that morning urging her to speed things up. Their next goal was to keep Daniel so distracted that he wouldn't be able to focus on the company. Rebecca, however, pointed out that Daniel hadn't fallen for her deeply enough yet. Michelle dismissed her concern and told her to stop worrying, instructing her to simply make him obsessed. Michelle added that she would arrange for Daniel to catch them in a compromising situation. Rebecca just needed to act as though she had been forced into it. Rebecca paused, then asked Michelle a question that had been on her mind for a while. Why did she hate Daniel so much? She clarified that she personally didn't care about Daniel and was only doing this for her cut of the reward. Michelle responded coldly that Rebecca had no idea what her life had been like and insisted that Daniel needed to take responsibility for the pain he had caused. Rebecca, nodding, mentioned that she, too, had grown up without a father. Just then, both of them noticed Seichan approaching from the other side of the lawn. Michelle quickly stood up and greeted him. She asked whether Daniel was still in his office. Seichan replied that he was, and admitted that the situation still wasn't looking good. Michelle then mentioned that she would prepare a comforting meal to cheer Daniel up and asked Seichan to come inside later with Rebecca. Seichan, however, noticed something odd. Though Michelle wore a concerned expression, her overall demeanor seemed far too cheerful for the circumstances.